This is Van Electric Ghost. We're live on air with Bjorn Lestrud. You're the host of the Blue Dragon Healing Podcast, and welcome to the Family Electric Ghost Podcast. How you doing today?
I'm doing well, Phantom. Nice to be here.
So, if you've watched my podcast, I always ask any guest a couple questions before we get to the heart of your story. What motivates you, and why do you do what you do?
Well, what motivates me is being able to help other people in a way that's authentically aligned with my sense of being. What's the second question?
Well, like why do you do what you do?
Why do I do what I do? Because when I do what I do, I feel a sense of purpose and wholeness that vibrates through my entire body, and nothing is better than that.
So, how did you find your way to you know, channeling and the types of practice like the voice of spirit and the things that you do with your practice with healing? Is that something you found over like experience, like doing other things than you found this, or did you gravitate toward this right away?
Both. I went on a plant medicine journey that started with an exposure to some shamanic practices. I can share the whole sequence, or we can pick it
Yeah,
apart.
however you want, you think it best fits like telling a story to the audience.
Okay, yeah. Well, then I'll just tell the story. It's pretty simple. So I had been working in a corporate sales job for years and years, and I did well at my work, but I had health problems that were starting to pile up. I was very overweight, like probably 50, 60 pounds more than I am now.
Hmm.
I had high blood pressure, arthritis developing in my knees, and it would get to the point where when I'd be sitting down, if I would uh, sit for more than a couple of minutes, I'd have to straighten my legs out just to relieve the tension that would sort of start settling into my knees. And there were other things too. But I one day went for a walk. Well, I'll preface this. I had been studying The Power of the Mind by Bob Proctor. And I learned about this thing called the stick person concept. And he basically had a mental model that he used to represent the human mind. And it was basically like a giant circle with a line through the middle of the circle, and then below it was like the stick figure, but a smaller circle representing the body connected to this giant mind. So you had the conscious mind on top, subconscious mind on the bottom. And I had just gone through this section of his material where he was talking about paradigms and how so many of the things that we do we're programmed to do before we're even able to consciously think for ourselves. And so he showed this picture of the stick person, the circle, but there was no top on the circle. The circle was open, and it showed the people around this image, and all their thoughts were just going right into this brain, and there was nothing there to protect the brain. And so I didn't think that much of it at the time, but I was at work one day near the end of the day, and I decided to do this little exercise. I just wrote down, like, what's my most painful memory? I thought about that. It didn't take me long. What am I most grateful for in my life? And then I asked the question, would I have number two if I didn't experience number one? And then I realized the answer was no, I wouldn't. And this caused this giant, the image of the stick person, the baby without the top on, that image came into my mind, and I saw it flip upside down, and all the thought patterns start to pour out of it. And so tears just started streaming down my face, like water gushing, but I wasn't like crying or feeling sad or really any strong emotion, just this really beautiful sense of peace. So I got up and I started walking, and I walked like 20 blocks the wrong way. I was just so swept up in the euphoria of oneness and peace. And so from that point on, I knew I couldn't go back. I couldn't keep doing that kind of work.
Mhm.
So I traveled the world for a few years, and I landed in Tulum and at one point. And a friend of mine, he injured his foot when I was there, and you could see his toe was really black and blue, and the toenail was almost entirely black. Like you knew it was going to fall off. Like anyone who saw his toe felt the overwhelming urge to tell him, you know, your toenail is going to fall off, right?
Yeah, maybe you should take care of that.
This. So I had just seen him about 2 days prior with the black toe. I see him again, and he's like, look at my toe. And I look, and it's like a normal toe, no discoloration, nothing going on at all. Like nothing had ever happened. I'm like, how did this occur? You know? And he told me he went to this energy healing ceremony called the light portal, and they did all this shamanic stuff, and he had a healing. I guess you could call it a instant miraculous healing. That's what some people refer to that as. So that's when I started to explore. I went to the light portal myself, and I had a release there. Nothing as profound as what he had with his toe, but I started laughing uncontrollably, you know, and this. So then this is when things started to shift. I set up a private session with two of the facilitators from the light portal. I wanted to go deeper with the work, see if it could really help me. So they came to my apartment. There was a man and a woman. They were partners. And the woman is from this long lineage of Muslim healers, and she's a seer and all this stuff. And she did a lot of like myofascial deep tissue type work with her, you know, with her hands. And it hurt badly when she would work on you. Everyone says that. Like, very painful. Tiny woman, scary hands, you know.
Yeah, powerful hands, yeah.
And so she works on me for like an hour and a half, and I mean, it's excruciatingly painful, but it's also a relief in a sense. And then the three of us sat and talked for a bit about what she said she saw. She was like saying, you know, I saw these energies from your father's side, this fear, anger, whatever. This from your mother's side, the sadness, fear. And I saw these guides. I saw, you know, a jaguar guide and a shaman, a Native American shaman guide. And the last part of the private session was like, quote unquote, you know, meet your guides, where they used a plant medicine called hape. So for those who don't know, hape is usually generally made in the Amazon by indigenous cultures, tribes that have a very, it's a very like long, painstaking manual process to make hape. But basically, it's usually tobacco, but sacred tobacco with some other elements of nature, like the bark from a sunu tree and some other things. And it has a psychoactive
Mhm.
component to it. It's not like just tobacco. There's something else there. And then they use their special prayers when they make the medicine as well. So it's kind of almost a little bit psychedelic, but very physical as well. And so they had this thing called a tepe. I'll show you. I have one.
Mhm.
So this is a tepe, right?
Oh, wow.
And so you would put the hape in, you know, pour it in your hand, and then scoop it in, and
Mhm.
then the one person serving another in like a ceremony, they would put it in their nose, and then the other person would blow into their nose.
Oh, wow.
So he blew this hape into my nose. And it burned a lot. He then decided he was going to stand up, walk behind me, and he had these maracas, and he started shaking them in my ears. And so, normally, when I would be experiencing something so extreme, the first thing I would want to do is try and think my way through it, but I couldn't because of all the sound.
Oh, the sound was
So
kinda like part of a process to keep
it
you from
was
doing.
disruptive, yeah. And then he started making these chanting sounds, some whatever. And then I start chanting. I couldn't stop myself. It just kept coming and coming. And then I felt this sort of like something really big that was determined to move through me. And in doing so, really pushed through some very dense energy that was stuck in there. And so I got sick, on the floor, and I purged a lot, and I was laying there dizzy for hours after this experience. Didn't even want to get up to lay on the couch, which was like a few feet away, because the floor felt more stable. That's how like I felt. But when I woke up the next day, all of the pain and the stiffness in my knees that had bothered me for the past few years was gone, totally gone. And so that was an experience with plant medicine, with shamanic initiation, but also with chanting at the very
Yeah,
beginning.
like non-Western practices, like indigenous practices, like the Western mind is so caught up in science and logic and our own dogma that I think like what I've experienced over time is just like, the indigenous peoples had all this knowledge, human knowledge that was kind of not respected by the more first world cultures. They didn't really respect it, and now people are starting to seek it out, like yourself. It seems like
Yeah,
to actually heal because they're finding like our modern world is not actually solving the problem.
it's not. And it's a whole lot of different structures out there that really all they do is consume people's energy, but they're just they're both positive and negative. They don't really solve anything because they operate within the confines and the limits of the mind.
No, not the spirit. Like the
Yeah.
spirit and the soul and the mystical things that like you have to have a degree of like faith because you're not going to logically prove it. I mean, science might be able to prove some things when you look at brain patterns after you do these shamanic exercises. If you were actually monitoring your brain, you can see
Hmm.
things are happening, right? So you could prove it, but maybe that's not the point to prove it. The point is to actually experience and not kind of throw the logic mind in.
Mhm. Yeah, that's true. Because you can observe something on a chart, but it's like I can I could watch someone go on a date, but it's a whole different thing if I'm on a date myself, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
See, the scientific method is not the solution to everything. It's a concept that okay, you might need it for certain things, but like life, you need spirit and the idea of like Gaia. I'm a big believer in like the energy of the planet, and there's a lot of folks that actually feel like humans are beyond the planet, like that what we do versus nature overrides nature. Like so we can command, like man can command nature. And I'm kind of like, no, the universe, we're part of the universe. And if you disrespect other parts of the universe, then you're not going to do that well.
Hmm. Yeah.
But something you find, like whatever path you're on, if you choose to understand that you're part of a whole rather than in command of it, then you let
Hmm.
go some things. And then once you let go of those things, you let go of the walls in the ceilings you put on yourself, then you open things up, the expansion of your body, mind, soul, and spirit,
Yeah.
right? Is kind of
And
where
that's where the most awesome things happen.
yeah, and it's hard because like you were in that corporate world and your body wasn't in a good position, your health wasn't in a good position, your mind, your body, your spirit. you were suffering, you were degrading, right? You were actually not where you needed to be. You were actually feeling like your arthritic pain and all kinds of things like you mentioned. And it's like that's like the modern world wasn't giving you a solution.
Yeah, and I was pretty young too to have
Oh,
those
I was-
experiences. I mean, at the time I was in my early mid 30s, and it's like these things were piling up. I'm like, oh,
Yeah, over time, imagine what happens like if you stick with that, if you don't pull yourself out of it. It's like what people are then they're on the pharmaceutical track, and then they're on taking all these antidepressants, taking all this stuff. It's like without understanding the road you're on.
hmm. I was I used Santa Maria, well, marijuana for a long time. That was kind of something I use as a form of escapism, but just to keep myself from getting too bad.
Mhm.
But I didn't realize the power of that plant even when used correctly, like in a more intentional ceremonial way, that it had such great power, which I learned later.
Yeah, well, you kind of need like a guide. You need a spirit guide. You need healing guides where there's all this like knowledge over time
Mm,
that other cultures have respected. Chinese medicine, indigenous, a lot of Eastern practices, practices in Africa. In the indigenous peoples, like they respect like nature. They're plants and not pills. They're they're,
mm.
there's things that they knew worked, but pharmaceutical companies they don't want you to know about those things because they want you to take their patents and their secret sauce and use that.
Oh,
So
yeah. If you look at the programming on television now, almost all of the commercials for some of it are pharmaceutical.
no pharmaceutical, but it's like it's rooted in our history as like, well, we did learn what these plants do over time. Humans, hunter gatherers, people who were tied to nature, they understood what was in the forest, what was in the jungle, whether you were in Europe or Africa or Amazon. People found these plants and they experimented and they tied it to their culture. They tied it to their practices. And
Mm.
over time, capitalists decided like, oh, we're gonna take control of that.
Yeah, it's interesting how many now there's a lot of research now being done on different uh, psychedelic type plants, but in like laboratory type settings in the States, like trying to take a Western approach to those medicines that they've been using for thousands of years to integrate it into things or different kinds of therapy and stuff like that, which I find intriguing, but
Maybe not the
also
right
curious.
mindset.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was just the mindset. It's like if you go back to the pure use of it, like the shamanic practice or a healer, light worker, people who had this handed down through oral history and tradition, it's probably closer to the actual like not that there's a right way, but it seems like it's not processed. It's kind of like, you take something that's highly processed, highly industrialized, it's got those aspects that they're not really the original intent. The intent is to make it profitable, to make shelf life work, to make it, to make it work within a modern context, not necessarily something that's going to heal you
Yeah,
in the
it's kind
correct
of like it's like
way.
doing yoga where you only do the body postures and you don't do the breath work or the meditation that goes with the
Yeah,
asanas, which is like
holistic approach. Like if you take
yeah,
one pillar or something, and you say, "Well, that's it," without understanding the whole picture. People like to just take a piece of something, and then then maybe they overdo it. Like they take it and they intensify it. Like
I go ahead. I just had this image when you were saying that of like a factory that's making pharmaceutical drugs, and it's taking like a psychedelic plant, chopping it up, turning it into powder, and then like adding it into like a mix with like 20 other additives, and then like a blue capsule rolls out on the
Yeah. Well, yeah,
production
it's like
floor.
what happens with, like, cocaine is like you could have the indigenous, like, Indian cultures, the coca, the actual leaf, and
Mhm.
if it's not concentrated, it's not gonna overdose you, it's not gonna give you the harmful effect, but when you take something, you over concentrate, that tends to be what, like, the industrial process does. It either makes it, like, toxic or overly powerful. It's,
That's a
like,
good
not
point.
appropriate.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
appropriate
So,
for what you need.
uh, and stuff like ayahuasca and bufo and these other things, they're already really strong.
Yeah, if it's already strong and then you take it out of context and mix it with other things, it's like, okay, well, you're taking it for profitability, marketing, and packaging. That's not exactly something that's for your soul, for your heart.
Hmm.
But, like, maybe you can talk more about your travels because you've
Hmm.
done a lot of world traveling. You found, from my what I assume is, like, a lot of indigenous practices that you had to seek out, like, you were out like Jack Kerouac on the road, like, you're out there trying to find something, you're trying to find the answer in the world, right? Was that your original intent to, like, you're gonna find it in the
No,
world?
my original intent was I need to get out there and feel expansive, not constricted, and feel a sense of journey and wonder. Wasn't really seeking out a teacher consciously at the
Hmm,
time. What I did end up doing was taking a microdosing tour around Europe by myself. Basically, I went to Amsterdam and I got some mushroom there, and then I started taking the. So I wouldn't have to fly with it. I would take the bus or the train, and I went all around Europe microdosing, and I had the most amazing time. But the experiences I had on the shamanic path, they all happened uh, in like a limited geographical area, but there was a number of different cultures that I worked with. So I'll talk about three of them. There was the Hunikun, the Yawanawa, and the Shipibo. So when you do ayahuasca with the Hunikun, their style is they control the show. The shaman controls the show. They have very traditional chants that they do at every ceremony and traditional music. And so they lead you through a process where you're doing the ayahuasca. You might do 2 rounds, and you're going through kind of a very specific order of things to get to the point later in the night where they finally take out the hape and they serve hape usually. And then once they've served the hape medicine, then like my experience was then the shaman busts out guitar or whatever and starts jamming and people start dancing and that was the way of it. The Yawanawa is more group oriented. They also have traditional songs that they sing, but a lot of the songs are meant to be sung by the participants in the ceremony. They sing together, or they might even be like involving not just singing but a movement, like getting in a circle or doing certain things, and it's very interactive.
like a dancing would, yeah, but it seems like it's a whole, like, it's not just one thing. It's like the music, maybe it's dancing, and maybe it's movement, maybe breath work, but it seems like it's not just one thing. It's a combination of multiple actions
For
or
those, yeah.
stimuli.
The Shipibo, however, on the other hand, totally different story, almost in their own separate uh side of things. They don't do traditional songs at their ceremonies because everything is a channel. They they don't call themselves shamans. They call themselves maestros, or the ayahuasca arrow. So, and at the Shipibo ceremony, everything is done in darkness. Everything is done in the quiet. Not even a fire is supposed to be burning. Not even a bonfire is supposed to be burning outside. And so you sit in the darkness. They serve the medicine, and it may take a while where there's just nothing going on at all, and then all of a sudden, the maestro starts to sing, and he's connecting with the vibration of the plant through his lineage and the vibration of his ancestors and guides and all of that. And if you have a really well-trained maestro that's been doing it for a long time and has a certain mastery, they can get up and go through the crowd and dynamically adjust their song to the needs of the people in the space. So you might stop in front of you and notice something, and so you might sing directly to you, and then all of a sudden he's singing to the person next to you, and then all of a sudden he's singing to the whole group.
Does
So
the
there
song
wasn't.
change? Is the song changing by each individual, or it's the same song, or he changes the song, or it's a
It's
different song, but for per person?
it's always being channeled, so it's always there's always something different and unique about it. There may be similarities in patterns, but then again, we could say that we may have similarities in patterns in how our energy works. So,
Mhm.
and I know it's the same thing when I channel and I chant, is that the songs often have a similar sounds to them, sometimes similar melodies, sometimes there's just many similarities, but they're never exactly the same. And the
Yeah,
energy is always different.
it's in the moment. Like, it's like the in the moment kinda, stream of consciousness. Like, it's not like a classical piece of music, it's like Chopin, it's always the same thing, right? It's actually kinda like, I don't know, jazz. It like, as a musician, what I get into is the idea that, the spontaneity of, of the moment. So, whatever room I'm in, whatever, uh, the crowd is feeling, what I'm feeling, what the band's feeling, it's that moment, and that moment's not gonna be same, an hour before, the next hour, the next day, or anytime. You might wanna capture that because that piece of music is uniquely special to that moment in time.
Yeah. Yeah. Something to that effect. Yeah. So the maestro is going around and he's doing this. And I had already sat with the Yawanawa and the Hunikun before I did my first Shipibo. And I was thinking, this is kind of slow, kind of boring. I don't know if I like this very much. And it kind of really snuck up on me because I felt like, oh man, this is going to be going on all night. Like I'm going to be sitting here. Like, I don't
Waiting
know
for
about
something
this.
to happen, and it's maybe too slow for the modern world. And we're used to, like, immediate, like, interaction, people,
And in
you
those
know,
other ceremonies, there was more stimuli.
more
This
going
is like
on.
in the
Yeah.
dark, but I don't know exactly when it happened, but all of a sudden at some point it became very, very, very enjoyable. And this is actually the first time I started having really clairvoyant visions, and I saw some of my guides, my spirit guides, like very clearly.
Mhm.
Uh, I didn't know. I thought at the time that the maestro was like channeling these spirits that I was seeing into the room, but they were actually just my guides showing themselves to me, and they came across like almost in a parade fashion,
Wow.
like came across the room, and it really
Well, that
blew my
approach
mind.
that approach seems really interesting because sometimes we get overstimulated, there's too much noise, there's too much going on. So if you're kinda in a place where you're, like, a place of quiet sometimes is a good place, like the darkness, so without your eyes being stimulated and your focus. Like, so your mind kind of goes whatever is it. So if you have the it's dark, your eyes aren't going to trigger your focus to be going all over the place looking at things. So then maybe you can go more internal or more
Yeah.
or
So
maybe
it
more spiritual. I don't know.
depends on the person, right? If you're open enough to receive in that type of environment, I don't know of anything better for ayahuasca, but there's a lot of people who prefer the more stimulated thing because maybe they're not ready to really go deep in that sort of environment. Eh,
Do you think it's
I
more of an
remember
you think
there
it's
was a
more of an inward journey when you're at that point? Do you have to be at a certain place in your journey to be able to understand what's going on?
well, of the people that I observed in those ceremonies, they did tend to seem to be less likely to be beginners than the ones that I observed in the Hunikun and the Yawanawa ceremonies. I do remember, however, there was one woman, she was sitting next because I did all this guy Penchi Nima, when the Shipibo Meister, when he came to town, I sat in all 12 of his ceremonies. And there was one ceremony I was sitting next to this woman, and the next morning she was just like crying, and apparently she was crying because she was overwhelmed from the singing, and she said, she was in that environment and she wanted to sing. She said that it was too much and she needed a break from it, but it just kept coming and coming and coming and coming, and it very really agitated her and stirred her a lot. So it's a lot of information.
Yeah, well,
Just
sometimes like something that's uncomfortable is kind of what you need.
yeah.
Um, it depends on where you are, because it's like some experiences, might not be as pleasant as you might have thought they would be. And so something is a lot more jarring to you or triggers really deep emotional response and you weren't prepared for it, it could kind of throw you for a loop.
Yeah, that is that is true. Just thinking back to some of the experience that I had. Most of them were very positive for me. I immensely enjoyed the vast majority of them, but there was one or two where I had a more difficult time and had to purge and uh, do more processing. In the ceremony, you just never know what you're really going to get.
You seem to be very open when you were on this journey to like trying, like you said, you stayed for like 12 different, like,
Uh,
they seemed like you were very much open to exploring, that you
Well, it was
weren't.
kind of one step at a time. The experiences I was having were so wonderful and they were progressive. So it was like each time I was I was seeing a little more, being shown a little more. And I'm trying to think, it just drew me in so
Oh,
much
yeah.
because I kept thinking, what am I going to see this time? What am I going to feel this time? What am I going to learn this time? And uh, my guides, didn't disappoint. The, the things that I saw and felt were,
Do you
but
feel like it's
then,
like do you feel like it's like an integration of, all these experiences to, like, move your whole life forward? Like,
yeah, that's another thing too. It's like I know so many people that they get kind of on the loop of plant medicine and then they just perpetually chase it because they want to have the next euphoric experience, and they consider like, oh, well, if I'm not having a euphoric experience, then I'm being disconnected from my spirituality. So I need to keep using this plant medicine. And some people go hundreds of ceremonies. I did
uh
20. I haven't done it in a couple of years now, but eventually a couple of things happened. One, after I did all those ceremonies and then I started doing work as a healer in Tulum, I went through a period of depression, which I'd never experienced before, at least acutely like that. Like it was like major depression, just intense sadness hitting me all day long, every day. And this went on for months. Eventually, it started to settle. And this is when I met my next teacher, which was actually a Shipibo trained maestro, but we were doing private sessions and we weren't using plant medicine. He was just chanting over me in sessions. And eventually I worked with him and did what's called a plant spirit diet, where you work with a particular plant over like a longer period of time. You're taking small bits of it, in a sense, kind of like microdosing. But these are plants that most people don't know about. They call them master plant teachers. There's a few of them that are more well known, like Bobinsana, Chirixinango, Marosa. And the thing was that you can do a plant diet a couple of ways. Most people, they go the way that they've heard about it is you go to the jungle and you basically live in a hut and the diet is your life. You only eat these certain foods and you only engage in certain behaviors. Well, this was more integrative. I guess you could call it more westernized, but
Mhm.
there was so many tremendous benefits of doing it this way. And this maestro I was working with had found this with the people he worked with as well. But the thing was that instead of me taking the physical plant, I received the vibration of the plant through the chanting that he was doing to me. And we would meet every 2-3 weeks over Zoom. Excuse me. He would give me a new chant. And then I was to listen to that chant every day and then do a grounding ritual after with like a mapacho, tobacco. And about a month into doing that, I went for a walk one evening. And as I was walking, I started feeling this warm sensation, like right in the kind of upper middle part of my chest, like right here where I'm pointing, like not in the middle of the chest, but like the upper middle.
Mhm.
And then I sort of felt like almost like the petals of a flower expanding. And I just all of a sudden just got swept into this incredible sense of oneness and unconditional love. It was so deep and rich. I felt I was out walking. Started like stumbling around like a drunk, basically. I Everywhere I looked, I saw the most beautiful combination of colors I'd ever seen. Every object I put my gaze on, I fell in love with. It's like, look at that tree. Oh, and so I mean, having this experience where I didn't even physically take a medicine, but I was still working with one was a real eye opener for me and kind of a big revealer to what was possible. And it wasn't long after that I came back to the States. And then I didn't have the access to all those plant medicine resources and healing modalities that I was so accustomed to having all around me. I started working with tuning forks because it was so accessible. I could have tuning forks here. And I could listen to tuning forks through the internet,
Mhm.
through the quantum field. And I started doing that a lot. And that's when, well, first I probably listened to 1,000 hours worth of biofield tuning sessions. And then I decided I'm going to go through their certification training. Why not? So I became a certified biofield tuning practitioner. And then what ended up happening was the practice with the tuning forks merged with my chanting. And I learned that I could work with the tuning forks, but my voice became the primary tool. And I was able to do more and less time with less, I guess, side effects
Mhm.
that people would experience by doing it that way. And so it's just evolved, and my primary
Yeah.
guide, is a blue dragon, so I call it blue dragon healing.
So you're able to integrate like sound and the practices you were talking about with the plant medicine and actually doing it through, like energy, because like sound is energy, right?
Yeah, it's
So
lights. Like
light. So
sound and
it's
light
all
are the
like,
same thing. They're just on
yeah,
a different
different
frequency,
wave
right? Yeah.
frequency.
So
Yeah.
so it's like with sound, we're feeding light into the body essentially, right?
Yeah. Well, that's like as an artist, musicians, we play with visual and sound, right? So when we have a show, there's a lot of visualizations that we do that we work with, and then we also work with this. I'm a synthesis, so I deal with oscillators, like analog oscillators, and any kind of tuning of any, even a natural instrument. It's like tuning your instrument to have certain frequencies, certain hertz levels, and you, as a musician, you learn that certain frequencies and patterns can actually trigger the crowd or the audience to feel things,
Hmm.
right? So the frequencies of your voice with lyrics, or the frequencies of your instruments and the patterns of your drums or percussion, all have effects on the human beings that are very ancient.
Yeah.
And when you learn as a musician to kind of guide the audience, it's not exactly what you're doing, but any musician that gets to be a master of their trade understands that the sounds they are making can actually result in the audience feeling things and kind of being in tune or being in sync with you or being out of sync with you.
Mhm. Yeah, that does resonate. And I use a buffalo drum a lot with my work because it has such a powerful, deep resonance that it really
Mhm.
feels so much like the heartbeat of the earth.
Yeah. Well, a lot of drums, like if you go to taikos or Native American drums, like my daughter, I lived in Japan for a couple of years. She had a sensei that taught her a taiko. And the
Mm,
Japanese taiko, is indigenous Japanese drum. Is just amazing what it can do. But then she took some African drumming, and then she started finding like the parallels between some of the African drums and the Japanese drums, and
mm.
then with Native American drums. And if you start checking, like the qualities and the tones and the percussive capabilities of these drums, he's like, wow, that you can dive into the history of what it actually means, right? But it's like it really starts to resonate. But what you're talking about, like I can identify and
Yeah,
understand that it ties to your soul and your spirit and how you feel. You can actually change, you know your the way, the state you're in with these
yeah.
sounds.
It's also like with the tuning forks, what I find is like every Saturday I do live events for free on Insight Timer, the meditation platform. And so I'm using my different instruments and my voice. I usually start just with the tuning forks. I'm just trying to clear some energy, calm people down, get them into their bodies a little bit. Then I'm doing the main performance, you could call it. But then at the end, I bring the tuning forks back out again. After I've done all the chanting, brought everything to a resolution, I bring the tuning forks back out and I move through the four solfeggio frequencies that I have, and those frequencies just go right in. There's no resistance at all, and so it can be such a state changer so quickly. Because I often will, I mean, maybe a couple times a week, because every day I'm listening to some kind of meditation or doing some kind of healing and for myself. And I often listen to my own work because I find it's effective on myself even. And there will be times where you listen to my own work and maybe I'll drop in right away, into into a theta state. But sometimes I'll be kind of agitated all the way up until almost the very end when I bring out the tuning forks at the end. And then in that space of a couple of minutes, I disappear.
State change. Yeah. Yeah, it's
Like
very
right at the end.
therapeutic. Yeah, it's very like a cathartic. A lot of musicians will tell you like they do what their work not just to make, an impact on the world, but it's very cathartic to
Mhm.
just play and listen to their own, you know, work before trying to bring it to anybody. It's very cathartic. We work through a lot of things. You know, a lot of artists will tell you that, from a painter to a photographer, but like any art that you're in, that there's something about it that you get drawn into and it becomes a practice, you
Mhm.
know. So in terms of like what you're doing, yeah, I can kind of understand like the the the, the reasoning or the whole state of what you're saying, and I can understand it maybe in a way that maybe somebody that's not in that space can, like, what are you talking about? Woo woo. They can't comprehend, or they can't see a relation that they can buy in.
Yeah, so I'm just listening to my body the whole time, letting the sounds express themselves through me, and then it really opened up. Actually, when I did a session with Bufo Alvarez, if you're familiar with that particular medicine, for those who aren't, it's that one that's known by people as toad venom.
Oh, okay.
Uh, and so there's like a Simpsons episode that was done a long time ago where they were going around licking toads, you know.
Yeah, right.
You s- so in this case, you'd smoke it, and usually it only lasts for 15-20 minutes. The strong effects, like the trip, but it's super super intense. And some people have a really hard time with it, and some people just have the most amazing time with it. Uh, I was in the latter group. I had the most incredible time with it. I they I had two people facilitating me in a private session, and they had me sitting up straight, and I would inhale and the smoke until it was gone, and then they told me just throw your arms up, and fall back onto the mattress. And so I did, and their intention was, while I was in that deeper trance, they were going to do work on me, try and remove blockages. But what ended up happening was I started feeling this sensation in the center of my forehead, like almost like someone was digging their fingernail like as hard as they could, and it hurt really bad. And then there was this explosion of blue light everywhere, this very, very expansive, like moment. And the next thing I know, I'm sitting there like in a trance where I can't even move, and I'm singing the most beautiful song I've ever heard in my life. But not just that it was so beautiful to me, it felt so good coming through, that my vocal range was so different than it had ever been in my life. And so I was witnessing this coming through me, hearing these highs I'd never made before, hearing these lows I'd never made before, kind of astonished. And there's this language coming out of my mouth. I had no idea what it was, and
Just kind
I
of
had no idea.
channeling, like you can channel, like the
I was
idea,
channeling.
like a lot of musicians feel that we can, like the muse, we
Yeah.
can call the muse, and like some people, they might need some assistance to get to that state to be able to receive the muse or the connection, because it's like it's
Mm.
going in and out,
Is that
right?
why then so many musicians like would do like LSD and stuff like that because they
Like
wanted
Hendrix,
to?
if you think about
Mm,
Jimi Hendrix was very in tune with like the cosmic, right? If you watch documentaries about what he would say, and then you listen to what he played, and then his description, like he was very in tune with like his Cherokee kind of background. He was Cherokee,
mm,
and then he also had this kind of mysticism with this the kind of hippie psychedelia at the time. But he was like a big purveyor of that. You can take that and use it in your art, and art actually didn't suffer, that it actually was increased from it. It's like a San Francisco mindset. But it's the idea that you can dive into this experiential, the experience. He called Jimi Hendrix experience because he was experiencing, you know, that cosmic kind of universal psychedelic trip. that he could
Yeah.
he was so in tune with it, and he was able to do things with his instrument because he didn't have the walls went away, and he didn't look at it as just a guitar.
Mm.
It was just this musical instrument that he could do anything. He could call birds on it. He could do water with it. He could do oceans with it. He could
Mm.
create all kinds of tones that if you just think it's a guitar, then you're limited to what you think you can do. But if you
Hmm.
expand your mind, then suddenly your instrument is not it doesn't have any restriction. I think that's the mindset. So then if like if you have a mindset that opens up, then that's why you don't see a lot of people that can do what he does because they have a lot of hangups. They can't get beyond the constraint. You know what I mean?
That's interesting you say that. And I've also found too that, like, for example, like a year ago, I went and I met this Mayan elder. They call him Abuelo Antonio. So he's one of the few Mayan elders out there that works with plant medicine as well. Like he had this traditional energy treatment that he learned that was passed down called the putzia. So I went to his place in Mexico with a friend and I received a putzia treatment. Well, yeah, there were definitely, I had some very like cool experiences there. But when I came back to the States after that, I realized that I had taken something with me. And then once I was able to process the feeling in my body that was connected to that, some new elements opened up in my voice that weren't there before. So it's like the integration of a different element of my mind expansion came through in my work through unique sounds coming out.
Yeah, it's just the opening of like, it's expansion. The idea like, I call my work expansive sound because I try not to be limited by, the instrument I'm working with or the sound I'm working with
Mm,
or the genre I'm in. And just let it take me wherever it's gonna take me and don't have any you try to have not, you have constraints because you're human. No matter what you do, there's some kind of we were a container with a certain constraints we have. But if you
yeah.
try to if you open up your mind and your body and your spirit, then you can find like you can hit notes, you could do things like you go back and if you're musicians will say this all the time, like you go on stage, you take a film of somebody, you come back and it's like they're in a trance, kind of like
Yeah.
they get
It's
into it.
necessary. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, if you ask them,
I can't
it's
hit
like
certain
when
notes until my mind goes
yeah,
off. I have to
yeah,
let it come in for me to do a lot of the sound. Yeah.
it's not very conscious. It's kind of like this, like you're in a dream state almost, but you're in a waking dream. A lot of
Yeah.
musicians, when they see it in the middle of they're in that sweet spot. It's like if you ask them like, "How did you do that? Can you get back to that?" They probably can't get back to it after you ask them, like after they're off the stage. They can't get back to that because that's in that moment. It's that trance state. It was in that time they were there. They could try to get back to it, but they're gonna do something different, you know?
Yeah,
And
every
that's
time.
yeah, and that's the art of it. And you have to let go because then some guys like, I gotta get back. I gotta reproduce that exactly, and that's a losing battle. Like
Mhm.
you're never gonna do it exactly the same way. Yeah,
No,
you might
that
get close, but you won't. No cigar.
yeah, that's kind of the beauty of live events. And there's something also about being on a type of stage, even if it's a virtual stage, that brings out your better work. I feel like, at least for me, when I know there's people watching when I'm doing it, like you do your podcast live, it's an different way of also shooting the same example, but it's like there's something about when people are watching in the moment, it causes me to focus more, concentrate more, and bring out more of myself.
But it's like you can't go back and do it. Like, let's do take two. Let's take it back from the top. It's like when you're in a live event. it is
Good.
like what it is, right? And so you have to learn how to roll. Like we say there are no bad notes, there are only opportunities, like in jazz fusion. Like if I'm in the band and somebody hits a chord that I didn't expect, I'll go with what I think is gonna I just hear it. Like I don't even think about it. I kind of know if I hear it because I get 10,000 hours of
Yeah.
playing. I know what goes with it, and my fingers will do it before I even think about it because it's like muscle memory. And so we don't have
Yeah.
to tell me what key it's in or what chord it was. My fingers automatically kind of know where to go, and it just does it. And
Yeah.
you just yeah, this it's just you have to trust it, it's just something that you can't think about. Overthinking will wreck it.
And to your earlier point as well, it's not like where we are now in our conversation. It's not like you could say, okay, now let's rewind. Can you start over from the point when we started talking about, the Yawanawa and we'll retry this?
And try yeah, go back and like you have a film director saying, "Take 2, go back to this mark, start again." Like, you're not doing it that way. Some people like to do it that way, though. There are
Oh,
some people like that that's their whole thing. They
oh,
gotta be in total control. It's a matter of, like, they don't wanna make errors or perceived mistakes, and it's gotta be perfect. I say perfection is the enemy of creativity, you know?
yeah.
The true creative doesn't want that restriction of me trying to be so perfect that you pull the life out of what you're working on,
Oh,
that
that's
you've
been a
wrecked.
lifelong battle for me is trying to find a balance between feeling the freedom of creative expression, but keeping myself reined in with some structure. Because after a certain time, I'll have a new planner or something, and I'll love it and I'll enjoy it. And then 2 months in, I'll start feeling like it's a prison, and then I want to break free from it.
Yeah, but that's like you get in this thing where like you get artists that like I can't keep on doing the same thing over and over. Like a Neil Young, he actually quit Crosby, Stills and Nash. They were in the middle of a tour. He had a bus. The rest of the band had a bus, and his bus actually went the opposite direction. Like they decided, like I'm not doing these gigs anymore. I'm done. It's like I'm not in the band anymore. I'm just done. And he had a habit of like in his career, like if he felt like it was becoming too routine or it was becoming like he's phoning it in, he's like, nope, I'm out of here. And it was the one that like he gave up. He would just switch to something else. He would switch to a different style. He would end up doing something different. And I think that to me as an artist is like that's kind of vital. Like you don't want to just be running the same song, same gig, note for note, over and over. It's like boring as hell. It's like your manager might like it, but I don't like it.
Yeah, it might bring in the predictable income, but what is predictable income and how long would that last anyways if you're not inspired to do the
Yeah, if you're phoning it in, like people will start figuring out this guy's like he's not even excited. He's not
yeah.
even he's not even like you got to be enthusiastic. Yeah, the passion is like is art. Like if I get passionate about it, then I'll be diving into it and putting my 150% into it, and I won't even think about how much work I did. It was just because I'm into it. If you're
Hmm.
into it, then people it's like a law of attraction. People feel when you're authentic. They know it. They people know when it's an infomercial and you're phoning it in.
I have to say though, I do enjoy Peyton Manning's commercials. They make me laugh.
But there's certain things like people like no matter what.
Oh,
They love the pattern. It's reassuring. Certain patterns are very reassuring.
hmm, hmm.
But so like on as a podcast host on your podcast, what's your goal with your podcast?
So my subtitle for my show is creative healing through story and sound. And so my intention behind it is to have a show where healing itself is not something we talk about abstractly, but rather something that arises in the moment through the telling of stories, through shared experiences of spirit that we do together in the moment, and allow ourselves to go deep, experience the discomfort and the good. And like I found, for example, like when I struggled losing weight, I I tried many things over the years, and I would lose weight with some, but the weight would always come back. Nothing I could stick to long term. I've tried intermittent fasting a couple of times, but I didn't stick with it. And then I thought to myself, well, maybe I just need a better story in my subconscious, better programming. So I went and I just listened to a podcast called Intermittent Fasting Stories. I listened to maybe 3 or 4 episodes of it. And that was all I needed. I mean, I've 8, 9, 10, 11. I'm about 5 months into intermittent fasting now, and I haven't stopped. And so to me, like, the power of story is the way to really connect with the large base of humans and to build that
Yeah,
connection. And then the spiritual experiences is really for people who especially have been a little bit into their journeys more, and maybe they just want to taste the energy without going through it. So I'll have a separate bonus, and I'll take the an excerpt out if we do like a meditation or a channeling of some kind. I'll put a separate file for that, so then people can just
focus
access
on
the
that,
energy of that without having to go through the story.
the whole thing. Yeah.
So
Well,
that's
that's
my
like cool.
season 2.
Well, that's a cool concept because like, I really I love the podcast form. I've been in it for a while, and we're like over 1,000 episodes. But the idea is, storytelling is the nature of human, history. And in
Yeah.
the long form podcast, which I'm a big supporter of, is this forum, that we can talk to human beings all over the world and get these stories out, and it don't have to be limited, based on our short attention spans, but allow these to be out here, and people, law of attraction, people find what they need. Like you
Yeah.
found that podcast, it was helpful, and that's what people need. So I want to thank you. We always end up hitting our mark. We hit the hour mark, but I did want to mention that bluedragonhealing.net is below, and that is going to be clickable for everybody on the show that listens to it or watches it. It's in the podcast description. We were just live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch.
Hmm.
And I do want to thank you for taking your time to be with us today on the podcast.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it thoroughly.
Well, thank you. Have a great day.
You too. Cheers.